welcome to Code Cracker's quick and nerdy video series. Short 10 to 15 minute videos jam-packed with as much information as we can fit into smaller topics. Today is going to be Veeam backup for Office 365, how to migrate your existing Veeam Office 365 data from a local disk-based repository into an object storage repository. So with that, let's just jump right in. So here I have my backup for Office 365. I've already done my local backup. I had an organization added into the interface. I backed up to a local repository, which by default is the Veeam server. So we're good there. Now what I want to do is I want to take this data and I want to move it to an object storage repository. Now, in order to do that, I of course need to add my object storage repository into the interface, and I need to attach it to a local disk because with Veeam Backup for Office 365, we can go directly to object storage, but in order to do that, we first need to have the data pass through a disk. We call this a caching disk. For simplicity's sake, this is usually the internal drive of the Veeam server, which I'm going to use again. One thing though, you'll notice if I edit this repository that already has a backup in it, I'm not able to offload to object storage like I would normally do. That's because I didn't do that when I initially set up the repository. So what I have to do in order to migrate data from my local repository to object storage repository is I kind of have to have this intermediary disk. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an object storage repository into the interface. I'm going to create another backup repository, which is just going to be a folder on the local Veeam server, and I'm going to specify to offload to object storage from that disk-based repository. And for my object storage repository, I'm going to choose Wasabi. You can choose from a variety of object storage providers, but we're using Wasabi for this video. Okay, so under object storage repositories, I'm going to go ahead and add my bucket. We'll call this VBO Wasabi migration. Wasabi is going to be S3 compatible. Make sure you check the correct option when you're choosing your S3 bucket or your object storage bucket. Okay, Wasabi is asking for a service point, and there's actually a website here that'll tell you what the different service URLs are for. I have created a Wasabi bucket, and I chose US East 2 as my region. So we can see here US East 2. Just going to copy that in to the Veeam GUI here. I'm going to change the data center to US East 2 because that's the one I chose when I created my bucket. And I'm going to add some credentials into here. So in the Wasabi account, you create a bucket, which I've already done. And I've also created an access key. Now keep in mind that your access key will show you your public key, but it will not show you your private key. So make sure that you download that ahead of time so that you can copy those credentials. You will not be able to see your secret key once you have done the initial creation of that key. You only have one time to download that. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to enter in those credentials. I've already created these credentials ahead of time just to kind of make this video a little more streamlined. So, but you can see here where you would enter your access key and secret key. And again, that's just something you get directly from the Wasabi account. Should be pretty straightforward. We'll click next. Okay. So this is the bucket that I created ahead of time in Wasabi. Folders, I've also created a folder called Wasabi Repo. And finish. Okay, now like I said, we can't back up directly to object storage, so I need to create another disk-based repository, and this is just going to be my staging or caching disk. So I'm going to add repository here. We'll call this Wasabi cache repo. You'll notice here that it's not asking for a location to a repository machine. It's asking which proxy has a direct connection to a folder. So the backup proxy does need direct access to this local repository. I've got my local C drive here, and I've created this Wasabi cache disk right here as a folder on the C drive. We'll click next, and we want to offload this to Wasabi, which is what I'm going to do here. If you'd like to encrypt your data, you can. It's probably a good idea. I'm not going to just for this video. And your retention, I'm just going to leave this as the default here and click finish. Okay, so now I've got an original Veeam backup that I did on the default repository. I created another folder on that same drive to be my caching disk because now I want to send my backups directly to object storage. So I've got my Wasabi bucket here. But again, this caching disk is where the data is going to go first, and then from there it's going to be offloaded to object storage. Now you'll need about 3% of disk space to cache this data. So whatever the total amount of data that you're backing up, you need 3% worth of space on that on the caching disk in order for the data to pass through that. Now we do have some very great calculators. I'll put those in the notes of the video so that you can plug those numbers into your Office 365 account and kind of see how much data that you're going to be backing up, how much storage space you're going to need, even for the object storage space there. So I'm ready to move my original Veeam backup for Office 365 that is on a local disk, and I'm going to migrate that to Wasabi. And how am I going to do that? With a handy dandy PowerShell script. So let's take a look at that. This is Veeam KB3067, which is how to migrate backup data to object storage. Now, you would most likely want to read through this KB article, kind of understand all the processes that are happening. But once you're done, if you scroll down to the very bottom, there's a script. Download this script, and like it says here, place it in any location on your Veeam backup for Office 365 server, which I have already done. And if I go to my documents here, I have this VBO script that I downloaded from that KB, and I'm going to run this with PowerShell. Okay, so I've only got one organization, one proxy, one repository, so this is going to be very easy. Even if you have multiple organizations or different proxies or different repositories, this script should still make it pretty easy for you. Just take a look at the name of the organization and enter the corresponding number. So you can see here, Veeam US Demo, Microsoft.com. That is the organization for my company that I've backed up. And that's the only one I've backed up, which has the 0 value. If there was more, you'd have a 1 and a 2 and a 3, etc. So we'll put in 1 for here. Okay, what is the proxy? Again, I've only got one proxy, and that is the Windows ID of that machine. So I'm going to choose that one. Okay, now here's where it's getting a little tricky. Which repository am I moving? The source repository. Now it's not going to be the Wasabi cache repository. That's where the data is going. It's going to be the default repository that I did the original backup to. That's what I want to migrate. Now where is the data going to? That's going to be that local cache repository. And remember, we've already set that up in the repository settings to immediately offload that to object storage. We can see here, we're getting a list of all the PowerShell information, the sites, the users, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back when this is finished collecting all of its data. So we can see here that the whole Office 365 org has been added into this PowerShell script. So the migration jobs have started. I can check each job state in the UI history under Jobs, Data Management, and I can press any key to continue. So I'm done here in the world of PowerShell, and we're going to wait. I'm going to pause this video again, and then we'll double check that everything was successful before we finish. All right, so here I am back in the Veeam backup for Office 365 server itself. We can see under the History tab in the Data Management that everything has finished. It didn't take long at all to move that data into object storage for me. We see that all those operations have completed. And if I go to my Wasabi account and I look at my test bucket that I used to migrate the data into, we'll see this Veeam folder here. And we can see the backup for Office 365. These were all folders that were created without me. So this is the repo. These are the different folder structures. And this is just kind of how Office 365 data is presented within the Wasabi bucket, right? Everything is kind of broken down into its own little categories. These are the organizations. Within the organizations, we've got the different kinds of things I've backed up, like mailboxes, teams, and I can go in here and I can see that all of these objects have been added into Wasabi. So that's it. I hope this video was helpful, and we'll see you next time.